Welcome to Travel Around the Block. Join Joel, Mike, and their guests as they explore how Web3 and AI are reshaping the way we journey, invest, and connect across the globe.
Welcome and welcome back to Travel Around the Block, where we dive deep with trailblazers shaping the future of travel and technology. We're your hosts, Joel and Mike, and today we have an amazing guest, Jack Dow. Jack is the founder and CEO of Grapevine, the AI native assistant that keeps business travelers compliant, supported, and in policy throughout their journey. Let's give a warm welcome to Jack Dow. Great to have you here, Jack. Thanks so much for joining us in our little coffee shop. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Really happy to be here.
Jack, can you share with us a bit about your journey and background? Some folks in our audience may know you extremely well and some perhaps not at all. So for level setting's sake, could you just tell us a bit about your life experiences to date?
I don't come from a travel background originally. I was in real estate for almost 15 years. I qualified as a chartered surveyor in the UK, which is like a commercial real estate sort of professional, and then moved to Sydney, Australia for 10 years. I was there where I ended up running core office and retail transactions for what became the largest commercial real estate fund in Australia. I did a fair amount of business travel, predominantly within Australia, so sort of Sydney to Melbourne or to Brisbane or to Perth. And I was quite a good corporate citizen in my day. I kind of, I'd book the flights through my EA. I would stay in the hotels that I was told to stay in generally. I think in Australia, you're doing similar trips the whole time rather than more European or American travelers who are kind of going to different destinations. So to a degree, I kind of probably followed more the Road Warrior format. But Grapevine sort of started as a personal pet project in the B2C space. It was originally a friends recommendations platform combined with a content aggregation platform. The whole idea was to aggregate and index travel content by location and category. So it started as building lists, and then we started bringing content into it as well. So the idea was you could build out a list of your favorite restaurants in Bali or things like that, or hotels to share with friends, but then also search for family friendly in Bali, and it would bring in all the best articles, blogs, and videos. We actually used an early version of GPT-3 to aggregate and index that content. And what we used it for was to identify the points of interest within articles. So if it was a restaurant that someone was talking about, it would tag that as a restaurant that other people could save and share into their profiles as well. So yeah, that was the beginning of Grapevine.
I think I'm getting the name of the company. I heard it through the Grapevine, right? Like somebody recommended a hotel to stay, like that's the Grapevine. So that's kind of awesome. I love that. And then I like that you share that you're originally from the real estate industry and then you transition over to the travel industry. And I think that's always interesting when someone switches from one industry to another industry. So I guess the big question I have for you, outside of Grapevine, just like when you got into the travel industry, was there this one major glaring, like, oh my God, I had no idea about this in the travel industry that like really hit you hard?
Well, actually, there was that glaring thing was really the inspiration for our pivot from B2C to B2B. And that was, so we presented at Travel Tech Europe, I think in 2019. The unintended consequence was a bunch of businesses coming to us and saying, oh, hold on, if you've got all this great recommendations for things to do locally, could we share that with our, hotel guests or people traveling with us? So, obviously travel agencies have got this huge, customer base, but they do very little with it. So people book a flight through them and then nothing. They'll book a hotel through them and nothing. And so a lot of, I think 2019, just pre-pandemic is when people started to go, well, hold on, how can we start to sort of squeeze the lemon? How can we start to get access to the revenue that is being spent? And through a contact of mine, I was introduced to a TMC in the UK, Dawes Travel. I met a guy called Dave Bishop there and, talked to me about sort of business travel. And he said, actually, we're interested in this sort of in-destination recommendations. It sounds really interesting because no one's really capturing in-destination spend or bleisure spend, as it was called then. And so we started ideating around, so he was quite instrumental in the ideation around, can we send these recommendations to people? But actually it was in a conversation when he said, hold on, could you do this for hotels as well? And I was like, well, why would you do it for hotels? Because, doesn't everyone book their hotel through their TMC? And he was like, no. And that was the sort of, the million or sort of $1 billion realization was that actually Granular have got a pretty good attach rate, but typically in the industry, I think it's somewhere between 20 and 30% is the average attach rate of hotels for TMCs. And so that was the big eye opener. It was like, well, these people, they need to stay somewhere, they need to get to the airport, they need to get from the airport to the sort of destination the other side, and vice versa. And so this is when the kind of the blindfold was taken away in terms of, wow, there's all this non-discretionary spend that is just not being captured by TMCs. And we've since calculated it to be about 300 billion that is being leaked to off-platform sources, which not only impacts the TMC in terms of lost revenue, but from a corporate perspective, duty of care, you don't know where your employees are staying, expense management, you've got to reconcile a bunch of expenses from third-party sources, lack of efficiency for travelers as well. So it was this like, aha, wow moment. If we can solve this issue where by encouraging travelers through right time, right channel communications to book in platform, there's a huge opportunity there.
Well, Jack, when people talk about startup life, they often think in terms of an initial vision, and then it's common to use the word pivot. And listening to you, I'm almost wondering, does that language make sense, or is early startup life almost a continuous open mind? Like maybe peel back the curtain a little bit about the mindset of a founder and how you navigate those early signals that you're getting even after you've founded. Like, how does that work?
Yeah. So I think startup life, however close you stick to an original vision, it is a series of micro pivots, so you're always going to have small changes in direction on the feedback that you get. Certainly successful startups listen to their customers, identify, maybe timing is not right for some things versus the other. Certainly AI will be a classic, example of that, being there's a whole bunch of fancy technologies, but maybe it's the core, like we can help get your data in good shape kind of thing that actually works well for people. It's the utilitarian side of things that gets it right. So I think there's a series of micro pivots to work out, but there's certainly also major pivots as well. We had about 40,000 people on our platform, the B2C platform, but it was just, B2C in travel is really challenging. Despite that, there's always this, wow, we're going to be the next kind of Facebook of travel or, whatever it is. But actually, whilst I resisted the idea that people will pay you for stuff, suddenly became quite appealing from a B2B perspective. And so, we rebuilt it from scratch to be a kind of communications platform rather than a research platform. And so that was a major pivot. I hear endless stories of, I think, the guys who founded Slack had started in, I think it was a gaming business or something like that. There's, almost every business starts in one direction and may end up in a similar space in the end, but you take a sort of, there's definitely what you'd call a pivot along the way. That's, I think, very much part and parcel. And you've got to, I suppose, have the support of your potential clients or existing clients and investors believing in your vision along the way.
When you think about what Grapevine did originally, was that driven by personal experience? Did you perceive a pain point and you were scratching your own itch, or was it more based on market research? How did you first come to this space, even back when it was almost more of a side project? How were you thinking about it early on in the very earliest days?
It was 100% an itch that I was trying to scratch myself. It was actually both sort of sides of it have been, but in different sort of ways. But, initially, the concept for V1 of Grapevine, sort of the B2C side, I literally woke up at 4 a.m. with jet lag, having landed back in Sydney from London. And was like, find a pen and paper and grabbed it and literally scribbled for about 2 hours. And, that was the start of it. And I was working kind of 12 to 16-hour days, 6 days a week quite often. So it wasn't as if I had a huge amount of extra time, but it was just one of those, look, life is short, go for it. And I knew nothing about product market fit or what problem are you trying to solve for people and all this kind of stuff. So that was an evolution as I sort of went along. But yeah, I used to read a lot of airline magazines. I'd tear out articles about great things to do and wherever it was, Japan, or, build up these inspiration things. And it was when Instagram was really kind of getting going. And you'd see all this stuff on Facebook and Instagram, people would check in, but actually searching for stuff was really difficult. I don't remember if you remember that on Facebook, where you could check in and say, has anyone been here, or whatever it was. And it was just all very fragmented. It wasn't the core value proposition of Facebook. So the original idea is, can I gather all of this information? I know people have been to Costa Rica. I know people have been to, where was that really cool place with a beach and, this, that, the other? Where was that cool ski resort? So it was kind of that kind of scrapbook of content and friends' recommendations that was the original kind of itch that I was trying to scratch for myself, selfishly, and I ultimately sort of worked out that there's a graveyard of friends' recommendations platforms out there. I think we had quite a unique sort of angle, but it is just, What I worked out in B2C land is you have got to be you've got to have incredibly high velocity products sort of evolutions. And so you need a, world-class engineering team and deep pockets to give you time to test a whole bunch of stuff out. And what I really found actually about business travel versus leisure travel is in business travel, you know what people's intent is. They are going for a business trip. Now, there's a whole bunch of iterations in that, but in leisure travel, it could be a wedding, it could be a funeral, it could be a boys' weekend, it could be a bachelorette. There's a million different iterations of what it could be. So what's perfect for a restaurant that's perfect for one trip to Paris with the wife might be very different to the kids' holiday, what you want to take your kids to. And white tablecloths isn't quite what people are looking for. So I love business travel, and that's what really resonated with me was like, how can I be looked after on this trip? A lot of changes and things like that in business travel. Once we started thinking about it, it was like, oh yeah, I did have all these problems as well.
When you think about a business traveler being somewhat similar trip to trip in terms of their intent, against that backdrop, if I'm a corporation, like maybe I'm a chief procurement officer or a travel manager, how should I think about what Grapevine will do? Because I'll play devil's advocate and say, I'm going to foolishly say, oh, business travel is what it is. The travelers do what they do. So what do I need Grapevine for? Because it just is what it is, right?
Yeah, and each corporation is different. Each company is different. There's obviously some that have very, very strict rules around travel, resulting in compliant travelers. They won't reimburse you if you don't book through the system and things like that. But the reality is travel is very varied. No matter how systematic it is or how regular it is, there's always things that change, namely availability and where you're going for meetings and things like that. So funny enough, I was talking to a travel manager at a large consultancy the other day, and they were saying that people might try and save money by staying in a place, or they might try and get their Marriott points by staying in a particular hotel and say, oh, well, I'll stay there. But actually, it's the other side of town. So there's then a $25 Uber to get you to your town. So it's the ability to sort of take a step back and understand sort of the whole trip, which is interesting. I think there's a lot of data, data underpins the core of personalization and I suppose travel program improvement. So to be able to, understand the traveler journey, I think is really valuable to sort of, when do they book? Is that the optimum sort of booking window in terms of the cost of things? If they book everything last minute, might they be spending 20% or so more on hotels or other ancillaries? If you can play that back in terms of what people are doing is really interesting. I also think there's a bigger picture in terms of, obviously I mentioned duty of care as a big issue and for a lot of corporates wanting to know where their travelers are. If there's a CrowdStrike incident or a terrorist attack, do people know where they are so they can look after them is a really key component for a lot of travel programs. One thing that is less tangible that I think is really interesting is, are your employees and do they enjoy traveling? Because if you want them to go and travel around the world and represent your business and be a representative of your business so that they are doing a good job and optimizing sales and all of that kind of stuff, are you presenting them with the best sort of information and support throughout their trip? Although it sounds kind of inspirational or aspirational to sort of to travel, business travel, the reality is if you're doing it a lot, it's a major, it impacts family life. It is, it's a big drag on your time. And if you're not kind of looked after, people might just go, do you know what, I might go to another job that I don't have to travel as much. And so there's a kind of a higher kind of HR business cost. I heard the other day that I think to rehire, the cost of rehiring someone ends up being 1.5 to 2 times the salary of the original person. And it's kind of like, well, as a business, what can we do to support these travelers in a way that they actually feel like they're being looked after? And those little small touches sometimes that can make all the difference to a trip actually results in better kind of tenure within jobs and things like that.
I have to say, Jack, I think you're way on the right track there with that. If you think about business travel, how often do we hear the word joy, enjoy, ease? So I think there's a lot of talk about words pain and pain points and friction and reducing friction. Maybe instead of reducing pain, we could actually add joy. I just think making anything enjoyable. We're recording shortly after the Super Bowl, and I'd say even if you're in the Super Bowl, the team that's enjoying it, I would argue, has the better chance of winning. And so you can be fierce and tough and aggressive, but you can be enjoying it. So I think enjoy is a beautiful word to add to the mix of business travel. It may be slightly less pleasant than that journey into joy. Servicing flight bookings can be a bit thorny and challenging and complex, and yet it's super core to TMC and OBT bookings. And I'm curious, how does Grapevine weigh into that space of servicing flight bookings, and how do you navigate that thorny little mess there?
Yeah. So our service is a post-flight or rail booking service. Typically, we get data from a TMC that a flight or rail has been booked. Think of us as a proactive EA that is looking at every trip in the company or multiple companies for a TMC and is working out who needs what when. Has someone booked an overnight flight without a hotel? Yeah, hey, here's some hotel recommendations for places you've stayed before, where you've got a corporate rate, places your colleagues have stayed, things like that. It's prompting the traveler to book in platform and to be a good sort of corporate citizen, messaging them a few days before their trip. How are you getting to the airport? Do you need a taxi or airport parking? Would you like a taxi at the other end, etc.? But as you'd expect the EAA to do, and I kind of like the EAA analogy. I think the EA is actually working on behalf of the company to encourage travelers to do the right thing, but is on the traveler side as well, if it makes sense. So it's not a kind of complete traveler assistant. It's actually working on behalf of the company and or the TMC. We've then got this conversational AI module that we've just built and hoping to put into a few customers very soon, which allows the traveler to then ask any questions of it as well. But back to your question around flights, we don't touch flights at the moment. I kind of think of flights to a degree as the anchor that drags back innovation in travel, because if you're servicing flights, it's a really complex thing to do. Margins for flights have decreased a lot over the last few years. And so we're really focused on picking up where the core booking has left off. We can give you information about the flight and things like that, but we're not trying to be a service business. We are trying to support the travelers and encourage them to book within in policy and in program proactively.
Got it. And so could I rightly think that you're complementary to those core services? So if I, for example, were an OBT or a TMC, should I see you as something that complements the offering as opposed to, for example, at the extreme, a threat or a direct competitor or anything like that? Is that
100%.
Yeah.
We're a lightweight plugin that works with existing tech stacks. And really what we need is a data feed and some small bits of configuration, and we're up and running. A lot of travel technologies are kind of rip and replace. We're the polar opposite to that. We work with existing technologies. I'm a big believer in microservices. I believe that there's a bunch of niche services out there that are really good at what they do. We plug into mid-back offices, GDSs, and things like that. And it's really about existing platforms and getting up and running as quickly as possible rather than it being a wholesale sort of change.
I think that direction of microservices interoperability is one of the major vectors of the industry. And you probably saw recently BCD, I think, has created the slogan, mantra, tagline, whatever you want to call it, open by design. And so I feel like your offering is well timed for a world that's moving in that kind of a direction. Shout out to my friends at BCD. I like the new marketing message and I look forward to how that comes to life. Mike, I'll hand it over to you, my friend.
Jack, I think that's super interesting because a lot of the corporate travel opportunities isn't fully recognized by a lot of people and they kind of just accept the pain. I kind of want to switch gear a little bit real quick, Jack, just to get your take from an investment perspective, because as an early stage startup, I'm sure you've gone through the rounds of raising for Grapevine. And for your area, either if it's in Australia or in Europe, are you primarily raising in those regions? Do you have a specific region where you're more comfortable in? At the same time, it's just like overall in terms of having conversation with potential investors, either if it's an angel or a dedicated VC, how much of travel education do you have to apply on them? General VCs, they may not know a lot about, let's say, what is the market size? What is the problem you're trying to solve, etc. So from your perspective, how has fundraising been for you?
It's a really interesting topic. And like all of these things, it's a journey.
Yeah.
I think travel is, everyone knows travel, right? So, everyone knows travel on a surface level. Everyone loves traveling. It's a really kind of emotive kind of industry. It's probably, I think in the pre-seed stages, it's easy to inspire people and I've got that pain point and things like that. And so I'd say that fundraising in the pre-seed stage of travel is, I wouldn't say easy because it's never easy to fundraise, but when you've got no product and nothing, you can pull on people's heartstrings, and there's definitely money out there for any kind of travel startup. What What I've observed in the industry is that there's a real gap between pre-seed and Series A. And I think a lot of that comes from the fact that travel kind of gets grouped into one mega category that sort of, has the kind of the graveyard of friends recommendation startups in it, and sort of the pre-seed sort of inspiration without much sort of thinking going into it. Whereas, seed is obviously the stage where, like, okay, you've got customers, you're getting to product market fit, you've sort of shown some traction and things like that. And I think there's a lot of people who've been burnt in the pre-seed stage of travel. And then I think there's a lot of people who don't understand travel as they should. And well, I say as they should, probably as we would like them to, as as startups and the broader industry as well, because the industry is the ultimate beneficiary of the success of travel startups. And so I think there's a few generalists and there's a few specific travel investors who are great and big supporters of the industry. But I think travel is actually incredibly broad. So there's hotel PMSs, there's revenue management systems, there's sustainability tech within business and leisure travel, there's communications and smart techie type platforms like our own. It's incredibly wide and varied. You can't have a specific travel investor. Even they would have to be across a range of different verticals within the industry. To a degree, we need to get better as an industry. I was speaking at GPTA earlier in the year and talking to the guys who put on some great startup sessions. I was saying that I think we need to be better as an industry at explaining the various niches within the industry and inviting generalist investors in to learn. Obviously, if there's a bunch of startups at the end of that learning session, it's great. But how many generalist investors know that business travel is a $1.5 trillion industry growing to $2 trillion over the next few years? How many understand the pain points of corporates in terms of policy compliance, duty of care, leakage, all of that kind of stuff? The various niches within business travel, a $1.5 trillion industry. And then the broader travel, I think, is more like 10 trillion. But, as an industry, it is colossal, one of the biggest out there. The money flows going into it should be as much, if not more, than other industries, yet proportionally it gets something like a tenth of the investment of other industries. The travel industry, if we talk about our niche, to be the beneficiary of interesting and potential value add startups, we need to educate the generalist investors about what the pain points are and what the potential opportunities are, because they're massive.
I completely agree with you on that front, because one of the things I recognize starting to develop anything from what they would call like Innovation Alley, where they do have startup pitch competitions or startup presentations, to their dedicated investment programs where they bring in either startups or investors and so forth. I like to think that's part of this overall education and also trying to move the needle for the travel industry to be more innovative, to give spotlights to entrepreneurs and investors as to what is happening and where the capital is being allocated to. So I think, your approach to educating generalist investors is very, I think at some point it's got to be pretty difficult, right? Because if I was in startup environment or entrepreneur founder, I guess my approach would be looking for specific travel investors, investors that I know that have invested in the travel space, hopefully not with the competition. It's like, oh, okay. So I think that's super interesting. And I think one of the things is, do you think also for like, there's something in the States or probably elsewhere, we call it CVCs, right? Which is corporate venture capital. So let's say, for example, Amadeus, they have a CVC, or airlines, they have a dedicated investment arm. Have you personally approached any of those corporate CVCs? And what do you think about them overall? Is it a strategic move?
Yeah, I'll touch quickly back at what you were saying about the generalist investors, which I think is interesting, is if you look at who have successfully raised lots of money, ultimately a lot of them has come from generalist investors. See, of the really successful startups in travel, how many of them have, started with specific travel specific investors first? Obviously, the bigger you get, you attract more people. But I think, Airbnb got sort of obviously went through Y Combinator and got investment from generalist investors there. I know Perk, I think, got investment from Local Globe and Vic and people like that who are more generalist investors. So I'd be interested to, it'd be an interesting study to see sort of out of the ones who've raised the money, like, how many of them have come from travel specific investors? There's some great investors like They Have Ventures who've obviously, I think they were in early with Muse and things like that. So, they are there, have been very successful. But as you say, if it's competition, if it's only a small kind of, investors can only make a certain amount of investments per year. And so if there's only 5 or 6 of them in an industry as big as ours, then it's going to create bottlenecks. In terms of the CVC stuff, I've seen a really mixed bag. My first experience actually was when I was in Australia, and a large group created a corporate accelerator program. Ultimately, people who were successful going through that, it felt like it was more of a PR exercise than them really trying to get help out to the businesses. You've got to be careful as a startup not to get lured into that. Any interest in you when you're really early stage is exciting and appealing, but it takes discipline to really work out. I think a lot of these accelerators don't favor the startups either necessarily in the output that they get, other than fundraising. And sometimes that's all we need is an investor at the end of it. And that's where they specialize a lot of the time. But you can end up giving away a huge amount of equity for services that, frankly, you'd be better off hiring the people yourselves. I know Amadeus Ventures have done a great job in investing in a bunch of startups, and Susanna's, she's always at these events and always super interested in people, which is great. And so, yeah, there's a really mixed bag is part of the key kind of criteria. Sometimes you can be competing against internal products they have and things like that. So I think, probably all of the time they're created with the good intentions sort of in mind. I would love to see a generalist pool of capital from kind of corporates within an industry. Could all the TMCs chuck in 50 grand each a year? So you've got a pool of 10 million or whatever it is to invest on an annual basis into innovation in the industry. So I think there's potential interesting structures that could be done that sort of encourages innovation within the industry.
I like that idea. It's kind of like the travel innovation fund that all these major big players can put in, right? And Jack, I think you touched on a lot of different areas. I was going to ask you about this, but maybe we can just synthesize it to 1 or 2 key points. So one is, what advice or recommendation would you give to an early founder when it comes to investments, just on the investment side of things? What advice would you give to either a travel or generalist investor when they're looking to invest in an early stage startup?
It's a good one bit of advice for a startup founder. It's an intro. You read so many things that people are like, oh, what I do is I set up 40 meetings and then I take them to invest 5 investors. And, I think the reality is, if you can get money from people who can add value, that's hugely, but also be wary of people who are like, I want to invest, but I want to be on your board and I want to take equity and all of this kind of thing. The best investors I've got have been incredibly generous with their time. And a lot of my investors are incredibly generous with the time, but the really great ones, I have a monthly advisory call. There's 6 or 7 of our investors who are from the travel industry. A couple aren't, just to give a different perspective, but I just give them a catch up, and it's hugely valuable just to get their feedback. And they're not there going, oh, well, I'll only join if you give me equity and things like that, more equity. They're genuinely interested in the success of the business, which is hugely valuable. So that'll be my, find people who, they don't have to be from your industry by any means. People who just understand what it is like to run an early stage business and can, support you along the way by just giving you guidance and just being a sounding board. One bit of, I suppose, luck I would pass on to any other sort of early stage founders. In terms of generalist investors, I don't think we can necessarily rely on them to just do this off their own bats. I think as an industry, we should be, creating an ecosystem that teaches, helps generous investors understand what the pain points are that they are in the industry. And that doesn't take a huge amount of effort from the industry's end. That could be webinars, get 2 or 3 or 4 corporates on a panel to talk about and support that with statistics. So a statistic I think we've mentioned the other day, T&E is typically the second largest spend for a business after employment salaries. It's clearly hugely important for businesses How, if that was at the tip of every investor's mouth, so what opportunities are, and it's full of pain points, what does that translate to from an opportunity? So I would say that my message to corporates is to get educated or learn more about the industry. But at the same thing, I think it is up to the industry to present that information to them in a format that is easily digestible and genuine and points out the opportunity that is there. I think if most investors understood the pain points and the opportunity of solving those pain points in the industry, it's an absolute no-brainer.
What I think is super awesome that you just shared, Jack, investor is so much more dedicated in terms of giving you more value outside of the capital. I think that's worthy of more weight as well. So, Jack, you talked a little bit about Grapevine earlier, and you alluded to the fact that there's this new AI component to it. So, share a little bit on the AI capability of Grapevine.
So last year, we actually spent a lot of our time rebuilding our platform from ground up. We got on board a few new guys onto the team with a lot of experience across customer data platforms and travel tech. And we ended up building our system to be kind of AI native, which was a really big endeavor for us. We knew we had to make some upgrades to the system, and we then just realized it was our opportunity to rebuild from scratch. Essentially, our platform is based around a customer data platform. And what it allows us to do is flip travel data on its head and hang everything off the traveler. Then you can see from a data perspective, the timeline of interactions and activities. And from that, you can work out when people did stuff, when they did it, and what was the impact, sending a message, and all of this kind of stuff. So it creates this timeline of a trip that allows us to then sort of be very granular in our understanding of travel behaviors and the impacts of communications and all of that kind of stuff. So at the moment, we're really looking at the travel data that we get given from the TMC, all the corporates. We're then sort of looking at the interactions that they've had up to that date. So when did they book, all of that kind of stuff. And then it's kind of how did our messages, or how did our communications work? What there is also the opportunity with this system is we could ingest front-end behavior if people wanted to see that in there. Also expense data, so that, if they book stuff off platform, you could also see that in that timeline as well. So it's a very powerful sort of engine. We've been a lot more granular in the data. We've been able to send more messages from the data that we've got for existing clients. That allows us to be much more sophisticated around understanding when people travel, if it's too little of a gap to be an overnight trip, and when to send messages. We've also got trip matching in the system. So if someone's booked a flight on one trip ID and a hotel on a different trip ID, we recognize that and don't send a message. Actually reporting back to customers which of their hotels were booked on a separate trip ID can be valuable because they may be paying the OBT sort of for a different basket. There's some cost saving opportunities there as well if people book in the right way. It allows us to be much more personalized. The system is now kind of the personalization in there in terms of where you stayed before, where your colleagues have stayed, all of that kind of stuff is much more sort of granular. So that's shown a really positive uplift in the bookings that we've seen through the platform. And then we're about to roll out taxis and airport parking and WhatsApp as well. But our goal is to be relatively agnostic through the communication channel. If people want it to be via Slack or Teams, we can do that as well. And then we can configure, at the moment, it's typically white labeled to the TMC. But if they had corporate clients who wanted it to be white labeled to them, it's very easy for us to configure that from that perspective as well. Ultimately, we've built a really dynamic experimentation engine that allows us to come up with a hypothesis, test it, iterate, learn, provide feedback. What are we seeing in the data? What's interesting? What might need the kind of feedback from a TMC? It's like, oh, hey, these guys never seem to book a hotel. Is there something your account management team can tell us? Oh, actually, they've got a local person on the ground, so they're not going to book a hotel. Well, let's not send them an email. So we see less as more. It's really about making sure you're providing value to the end user. So that's kind of pillar one of our platforms, proactive communications. We've got two other pillars. Pillar two is 24-hour support via conversational AI. And then the third one is real-time reporting and insight. So we provide a base layer of reporting to customers. One of the things we're looking to do throughout the year is provide this much more real-time kind of, if people want to talk to the data, they can, and things like that. But we need that data for ourselves to be able to, and it's all encrypted and very, all the personal information taken out of there, but it allows us to analyze the trips and things like that. So it's important for us.
That'd be fantastic because later on, I kind of like to get into like a futurist prediction thing later, but I'm just going to ask you one right now. Do you feel like there's going to be a moment where there is not really going to be a need for travel arrangers or executive assistants, especially with the advent of how fast AI is moving and how much information it's going to be able to know about more than I think an executive assistant or a travel agent is going to know? A platform like Grapevine could maybe be a really good co-pilot to an EA or a travel agent. But at some point, I think it's going to be so good that you would not even know the difference between a tech AI platform versus a real EA.
My personal view is we're always going to need people. It's slightly scary to not need people. Like, humans feed off human interaction, and AI can get you somewhere where I certainly see in the next 10, 15 years. Who knows? Ian, I was watching The Matrix last night, so it might be all batteries for. I think if you think about what AI can do, a good example of what AI can do is it can answer questions that you might search for either in your emails, emails that you get from airlines. It's like, where's the one that shows me what terminal I'm going from? You know, where searching on Google, where the lounge. It's like all this really quick information that you just want to be like, hey, where's this? And there's no ROI or sort of. There's no, that's the kind of thing an EA or a travel agent just does not want to be doing. I think there's what you really want them for, and ultimately what travel is today is there's online booking tools so people can book on their own. There's then a lot of bespoke people. A lot of travel is still booked, in corporate travel is still booked through an EA because they want to have a human conversation and lean over their desk and say, hey, can you sort my travel to wherever it is for next week? Now, I think exactly what you said there. Your EA could have a co-pilot that she repeats that into, and it's sort of, or he repeats it into, and it comes up with some solutions really quickly. But there's never, we'll see. But I personally think in the short term, there's a reassurance. Travel is one of the most nuanced sort of industries in the world, and a trip is, there's never two trips can be identical, but have a whole bunch of different moving parts that make it really complex. So. AI is only as good as the data that it's got. And I think, it's not going to have all of that to hand in the immediate future.
With that said, let's take a look at your AI.
Hello.
Hey, Jack, I'm Archer from Grapevine Travel. I see you have an upcoming trip to Leeds, departing on March 9th and returning on March 12th. Would you like me to check the best hotel deals in Leeds for those dates?
Yes, please.
I have found 3 hotels for you in Leeds: Mercure Hotel Leeds, Citizen M Leeds, and Park Inn by Radisson Leeds. Which of these would you like pricing information for?
The Mercure, please.
The average nightly rate for the Mercure Hotel Leeds is £131. There are options for a classic twin room or a classic room with 1 double bed, both with a total price of £473 for your stay. There are also refundable options available for £528. Would you like to proceed with booking, or would you like to explore other options?
What's my travel policy for nightly rate caps?
Nightly rate cap for hotels in UK cities is £135. Rates above this cap require executive leadership team or senior leadership team approval. The Mercure Hotel Leeds has an average nightly rate of £131, which is within the cap. However, some of the refundable room options are priced above this limit.
Okay, thanks. Can you tell me if it's got a swimming pool or a gym there, please?
Let me check that for you right away. Yes, the Mercure Hotel Leeds has both a swimming pool and a gym. These facilities are part of the Feel Good Health Club and are available for guests to use.
Great. And I'm actually been invited to a football match at Leeds United. How far is it from the Leeds United football ground?
The Mercure Hotel Leeds is approximately 9 to 11 kilometres, or about 6 to 7 miles, from Elland Road Stadium, the home of Leeds United. This would be about a 15 to 20-minute drive, depending on traffic.
And final question, I've got a meeting before my flight from Leeds Airport tomorrow. Is there a BA lounge there?
Let me check that for you. Leeds Bradford Airport does not have a dedicated British Airways lounge. However, British Airways business class passengers, along with gold and silver card holders, can access the White Rose Suite Lounge. This lounge is used as the British Airways lounge at the airport and offers a buffet and staffed bar.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Mike, I feel like we just saw a new paradigm in how a traveler experience can be. And Jack, if I may, first of all, congratulations. That's absolutely amazing. And a couple quick reactions. One is I could easily imagine how beneficial that would be from the business traveler's point of view, but I can't help but think about for a TMC, for example, how nice it would be to deflect some of those types of calls where that was important to the traveler, but doesn't drive revenue to the TMC. And so the call deflection potential of that seems massive to me. And also the traveler satisfaction angle is obvious. So really love that. Again, over to you, Mike.
I agree. I think that's awesome, Jack. The combination of the user experience to having that chat interaction, some of the things that you could probably get either manually when you Google something online or if you ask ChatGPT or so forth, but you have this other data that they don't have access to, obviously. You have more of the program access. And I think there's a lot of ways that you can expand on that. So it's definitely something I wish, like for me personally, it checks that first initial box. If you, as an investor, is like, would this be something that I would use, right? And it checks that box for me. Especially, I can see it being expanded beyond travel and on the hotel side or on the air side too. Because a lot of times, personal experience is I lose track of where my expenses are and where my potential per diem is, and how much do I have left? Can I, how much can I use and so forth, right? So being able to have like someone that is available 24/7 right there to answer those type of questions, super awesome. So definitely see how you guys can expand on that. And just like at the same point, you're able to provide that through different comms channels, to what Joel said, being able to alleviate a lot of that touch point. So very cool. Man, yeah, I love
Yeah,
it.
and stylistically, Jack, very natural. It was really in many spots indistinguishable. You couldn't discern the difference between what it would be like to be chatting with an actual EA. So I love the way you're on this balancing point of a proactive EA as opposed to an AI assistant. That really resonated with me, and that the fulcrum of kind of looking after the corporate interest, but also keeping the traveler happy. So I just think you're on a nice fulcrum there. If I could challenge, demo is awesome, and this is a step to a different place. When we step way back, Jack, and look at the travel industry overall, I wonder if we could ask you to be our prognosticator in chief and give us a glimpse of where the industry might be over the next 5 years or so. I think the demo already is quite forward looking, but even to give us a sense of where you think things might head in the next few years.
Yeah, so I think the reality is travel in a way is a bit like banking when you think of innovation in an industry. There's newcomers that make it all look really easy, but the reality is that the piping that sits behind it can be pretty archaic, and it favors the small niche players. But as soon as you want to get into the big industry changing, getting the wheels into motion, there's a whole bunch of evolution that needs to happen, and that's really around data pipes and making sure that people's data is in a good place. And back to my comment about sort of flight being the anchor that drags back innovation, there's just so much infrastructure there that just makes everything so difficult. And I think the handbrake on innovation is really going to be around data and evolutions of core products, and probably to a degree the willingness of incumbents to evolve and adapt. And some of that probably comes down as much to business models and things like that as it does to technology and innovation. I think there's a lot of people to win business, but I think there's a lot of big businesses out there that are struggling because everyone expects everything for free in travel. And the reality is a bunch of people have got expensive systems and resources that make travel seamless. And so it's as much of a, business model and kind of, business model discussion is about technology sometimes. But then, there's willingness to adapt the core technology. So where do I think it's going to be? I think there will be an AI interface for almost everything within the next 3 to 5 years. Travelers will have information at their fingertips through technologies like we've just shown. And really kind of the key to being able to do that, the LLM or the voice assistant there seems like the most complex bit. The actual IP there is in the customer data platform, the encrypted data. So the LLM sits on top of it and it can dip in and out to get the information it needs at any given point in time. And that's the really powerful bit, because you can build up this kind of personalization. Oh, can I tell me where there's a good Japanese restaurant around me? Cool, there it is. It remembers that you like Japanese. So next time you ask for a recommendation in a different city, last time you liked Japanese, here's some good places around you. That model, and I think as people adapt more sort of sophisticated data models, will allow innovation to happen, even if the kind of stuff in the background isn't necessarily up to speed. But I think user experience is going to become a lot better, and a lot of that's going to be sort of voice and kind of text driven.
Thank you. The upcoming product announcements, maybe over the next 12 months, is there anything you might want to tease for our audience that even if it's, we think we'll have that within 12 months, anything you might want to tease or not, but just wanted to give you that opportunity.
Yeah, so the core things we're focusing on at the moment are the non-discretionary spend. I think taxi and ground transport is a really big opportunity. The reason for that being that every trip pretty much needs, a lot of travelers talk about a frustration of theirs being the trip doesn't start at the airport. It starts at your home or the office or wherever you're coming from. And so it's that kind of starting the journey from where you start the journey. Almost every trip is either going to need a taxi or some form of transport to get to the airport to the other side, and vice versa. So actually, on a day return, if I'm from London and I go out to Heathrow or Gatwick and to Zurich and fly back in a day, that could be 60, 70 pound taxis for that trip. That is more than an average hotel booking in terms of the total amount and the commission on it as well. So I think that's a huge opportunity, as well as the data you get and the sustainability perspective, airport parking in terms of meeting the traveler where they are. What do they need? I want to drive to the airport so that I've got my car at the other end. And then visas is another big one we're talking to various people about at the moment. And it's the ability to pinpoint the people who really do need a visa and prompt them. So, hey, Joel, you're flying to Zimbabwe next week. You're an American citizen, therefore you're going to need this kind of visa. You probably don't need a visa at all for Zimbabwe. It's the ability, rather than a blanket, you've booked a trip, you might need a visa, to be very specific about who you are, what your passport is, and what you need. Do you want to handle this yourself, or do you want to pass it on to someone in your team to look after it for you? And so that kind of prompting for that core stuff is that core content. Pushing that into the text, WhatsApp, and other channels, Slack and Teams, is probably the next evolution of that, plus the conversational piece. So that's our main focus. I suspect that'll fill up our year. The other bit that's sort of subject to interest is the conversational piece on the data. Our focus on data is less a typical BI tool. We work with a lot of BI technologies, and they're more about how you're running your business and where your costs and things like that. We're really interested in what does the traveler experience look like? What are people doing from a booking behaviors perspective? And how can we make better programs by identifying and talking to travelers and really eking out what is value to the traveler that actually makes them more excited about travel and enjoy travel, as we talked about at the beginning. So that sort of will be customer driven on that.
Jack, I'm picturing a world not so far in the future, maybe even tomorrow, where a prospective employee of, you name it, Amazon, Google, whomever, is, oh, by the way, just one quick question before I join. You guys use Grapevine, right? And so I'm just, the world that you're creating is one where travel is so much easier and more enjoyable that I could see it becoming almost a decision driver for high impact travelers for whom this is like affecting every day of their life. Love the direction you're heading. I wonder if Mike and I could impinge upon you for just a few more minutes to go into a lightning round. So over to you, Mike.
Yeah, thanks. So Jack, one of the things we love to do is to give our guests the opportunity and ourselves trying to get an insight from you. We try to structure a little bit by having these like 3 or 4 lightning round, futurist type of questions. My question, do you think stablecoin in terms of travel, where that play is going to be? Do you think stablecoins is going to be a payment option, Expedia or Booking? Do you think that's going to happen? Do you think it's not going to happen? Do you think it's going to happen within 2 years, 3 to 5 years?
How lightning do you want this?
Yeah.
No, I think large credit card or large payment processors have taken big commissions on payments for a long time that has impacted businesses and their margins and things like that. And I think the concept, and I'm not like a guru on stable coins sort of by any means, but conceptually the idea of very significantly reduced fees for transactions, but also these transactions being at a spot rate or at a much lower rate is going to be very attractive to people. The pipes that are being created by these guys is the future. I can't see where it's not. So yeah, it's a great application for that technology.
Cool. And just to keep the lightning round moving, here's another scenario, Jack. AI on our phones, such as Siri, could be considered the primary agent in the future, orchestrating other agents to simplify our lives across finance, medical, etc., travel. So the scenario here is there'll be an agent marketplace in the future, just like there's an app store today. And your options, sir, are A, not going to happen, B, within 2 years, C, 3 to 5 years, or D, it won't be on the phone
I think it's somewhere between B and C. I think it's 2 to 3 years.
Joe, I kind of want to get your take. Do you think it's going to be B and C or B or C?
I think agents and form factors will be two dimensions of it. The death of the phone is greatly exaggerated. I see phones becoming a long-term marriage for decades to come. I think anyone who prognosticates the death of the phone is probably underestimating people's attachment to that device and that form factor. But at the same time, there'll be more ethereal forms that are maybe not the traditional form factors. I could imagine, for example, we're having this chat and my pen is noting the observations and perhaps taking some notes on I've happened to have earbuds in. I could imagine them being another form factor. And I also just think long term, if I get a little bit inspired by Jack watching The Matrix last night, I think we're heading to a world of kind of ambient intelligence where you walk into a classroom, you walk into a business meeting, the room itself has some kind of intelligence built in that just appropriately supports the event that's happening and senses this is a business meeting, this is a classroom. And I think if you think about the way a plant responds to its environment, I would envision buildings in the future becoming more alive like that. So Mike, that's my attempt to answer your impossible question. So like I said, 2.74 years is my answer as well.
I just add to the bit about the agent on your phone. Like we're already seeing a Clawbot or whatever it's called, in a way already happening on your phone. And a lot of people make instructions through WhatsApp or whatever it is. I think the interesting implication is security. And I think where the incumbents have a massive advantage, I would defer to Google before I defer to anyone else, making sure that kind of stuff is safe and that it can access all my data. I would love an agent to be able to kind of look through all my emails, create this, that, the other. Like there's got to be a fast follow on that, and that getting onto your phones quite quickly is going to happen pretty soon. Ultimately, the more data someone has on you, the more personal or a system has, whether that's a human person or back to the EA analogy. My EA knows where I like to eat. In the days when I was a regular business traveler in a bigger company, you have an EA that's stuff for you and knows the kind of things you might like. The caveat is travel, as we said earlier on, it's incredibly nuanced and different. And what, someone might be great at booking a business restaurant for you isn't necessarily what you want to do in your spare time and things like that. So I think the concept that something knows you better than you do and kind of knows all your nuances will require huge amounts of data that it can partially get. So probably in the terms of hyper-personalization, how we define it, yes. But is it like a sentient being that knows what you're thinking before you sort of know? I don't think so. Just having what I showed you on the voice stuff earlier on, just being able to say, hey, where's the lounge? It's here. But unless you're business class, you won't necessarily get the kind of access. Like the amount of times you go and I've got an Amex Gold card. Can I get into this lounge? And then I'm sorry, you can't bring a guest. All of these things that if you just knew without, there's so many to make your life easier and save costs as well. Like a lot of out of hours costs are for quite simple questions. Hey, what terminal am I going from tomorrow or tonight, or all of this kind of stuff. So I think you can definitely bring a lot of value to people. Depends on what your definition of hyper-personalization is.
I have to say we're getting rather deep for a lightning round. Bring this last one to a true false, and let's just leave it at that. For the coins will be the default payment rail for AI agents. True or false?
Agreed.
All right. I love the boldness of it. We've got a true.
I think it's the future, I think.
Very cool. Jack, you've been very generous with your time on what I know is a busy day for you, and really greatly appreciate all your time and insights. We just want to thank you again for being here, and congratulations on everything you're doing. Thank you for bringing some joy to an industry that talks a lot about pain, and wish you a wonderful rest of your day. And thank you again for being here. Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining Joel and Mike for another episode of Travel Around the Block. If you have any questions or topics you would like to see discussed on the show, or if you'd like to be considered as a potential guest or sponsor, please reach out to us at hello@travelaroundtheblock.com. And of course, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Wishing you a wonderful day wherever you are around the block.